AWS S3 is probably one of the most used, biggest, and the most important service across all the companies on the planet today. And they have launched one of the biggest updates to S3 in the last few years. So AWS is calling this feature as Amazon S3 Files, the first and the only cloud object store that provides a fully featured, high-performance file system access to your data. A lot of things to break down within these two couple of, the title and the sentence, the description, but this is gonna be fun. All right, so let's try to understand this, right? So I'm gonna give you a very simple example. We are a lot of people on this planet, right? Almost 7-8 billion of us. And every single day, a lot of us have mobile phones and laptops and desktops and all of that. Every single one of us is generating some sort of data. We are clicking new photos, recording videos like I am right now, putting it on YouTube, putting it on Instagram, all of these platforms. So we are generating a lot of this data, right? And this data needs to be stored somewhere. You are generating two types of data. First is something that you are uploading on internet or some place, and second is that what you are keeping on your own computers, like your Excel files or maybe even like npm install or coding files that you are generating or softwares that you are downloading. So there are very popular two ways of storing data, which we all use as people and as companies, organizations as well. First is of course object storage, which is what S3 is, and second is block storage. So an object storage like S3 is inherently very simple compared to a block storage, which we'll get to. What this has is a few things. It'll have a key, which is what, the slashes, and we sometimes include directories, but there are no directories as such in object storage. The slash is just used as a separator, and the UIs just make it fancier to look at directories, but there are no directories as such. Then there's a value, which is basically, the file, the object itself that you're storing. And there is also metadata attached to it, right? You can optionally attach some metadata, some information, like a small piece of information with the file itself. And that's it. This is as simple as it gets, right? Now, this also has limitations, right? Because when you're using an object storage, what you can do is you can either get the full file or, just a partial file based on HTTP bytes range or whatever. You can either write the full file. So there is no way for you to just append something, right? If you want to append to a file, you have to actually get that file, download it to your actual block storage or file system, which I'll get to, append it, and then upload it again, right? Or you can just delete it. Right? So the operations themselves are also very simple. Also, generally speaking, the way we work with object storage is, like anything that you have added on object storage, is generally over HTTP, right? So there are no file systems or there are no mounts or anything as such that you can use with operating system directly. You generally work with object stores like S3 with only the HTTP APIs that the platform has exposed, right? Now, of course, you would have seen my S3 engineering video, right? Where I talk about hard disks. Like under the hood, S3 itself consists of a lot of hard disks, right? So of course, under the hood, S3 is not like some magic, right? It is using hard disks under the hood. So it is using some sort of file system or some sort of thing in order to organize the files, but it's just not important for you to realize, right? Because it's just abstracted away from you completely. You don't ever get to see the actual raw hard disk, which does not even include or contain all of your data, right? Because I mentioned that the data is also sliced and chunked and, it's stored like in different ways using erasure coding. If you would have seen that video, you would have known that. But the core idea is that this is not important. But under the hood, yes, the truth is that S3 itself is using hard disks for storing that, and that might be using some sort of block storage or whatever. But that detail is not important. Block storage, on the other hand, is sort of like a raw storage, right? So it's basically like, you just having a storage system and you're dividing that into, for example, 4 KB blocks, right, on the disk. And in a way, these individual blocks that are there, they also sort of operate like how I mentioned about object storage, right? That you can read this block anytime. For example, I ask it that give me block number 2, then it can give me all the content, all the data of this block number 2, which, like I mentioned, by the way, would be of 4 KB size. So these are like fixed size blocks. Every single block is 4 KB. Or I can write new data on that. You can't really append on this. Again, just like object storage does not allow you to do that. And you can't do like any fancy operations or anything like that. There is no metadata as such over here because this is, I'm just showing you a very raw representation. On top of block storage, you can design file systems. right? Like NTFS, for example, is a popular file system. So you can design these file systems that allow you to store the data and store the files, create folders, the typical hierarchy that we are aware about, the permissions, all of those things. Now, what S3 has released as a feature over here is that they are making it possible to have the benefits of both worlds. So they want to have object storage benefits with a file system benefit while keeping the cost same. What this means is that you can store arbitrary amount of data, like large amount of data on S3, but you can get file system like millisecond level latencies for accessing and writing and reading the data using a single interface. So you don't have to do multiple things together. Now, why this is important? Look at this. Why this is important? For example, you have any process or AI system or agent or whatever, like this could be anything, AI or process or anything that's working on this computer, right? Using something, whatever it is doing. Let's say you want this storage to be persistent over S3. The problem is that if you are continuously synchronizing it with S3, this can get too costly, first of all. But most importantly, it will also get very, very slow. Because remember, I told you that the way most of the object storages work is using HTTP, right? For getting, putting, deleting, whatever. And because there is no append or anything as such, every single time you are making a append or a write, you have to do the full write. You can't do like a partial write. So this makes operations directly routed through S3 very, very slow. Of course, as a solution, what you can do is you can use something we call as an elastic file system, EFS, from S3, from AWS. So if we look at elastic file system over here, you're going to see that AWS says it's a serverless and a fully elastic file storage system. What this basically means that this itself is also sort of like unlimited, right? Just like we have object storage, this is also sort of unlimited, but this is built to be a file system, right? It's not just arbitrary raw storage. You can basically attach an EFS with an EC2 over here. Let's say this computer is actually EC2. And once you have mounted it, you can run these commands like ls, cat something on a specific file, or, you can just touch different files. You can make directories, you can set permissions, you can change ownerships, all of the stuff that we are typically used to doing. But the added benefit of the fact that this storage is basically elastic. So you don't have to think about it. Like you don't have to resize it, or you don't have to figure out like, okay, I'm hitting my storage limits. So what do I do? Right? Now, again, the drawbacks of this, the benefits is, of course, this is fast. And this is like an actual file system, not like an object storage, like a fake object store. But the drawback, obviously, is that this is going to be very, very costly, right? Look at this, for example, for standard SSD for EFS, you're going to pay 30 cents per gigabyte of data stored, right? Which is, I think, which is more than 10 times the S3 cost, right? Which is just on the storage itself. So this service is at least 10 times expensive than S3. But more importantly, the problem is that EFS is built to be a file system, right? So there is no way for you to, for example, put a cloud front in front of EFS for making the data available to other people. Or, it's just not as, I would say, simple as S3, that you just put an object, you get a URL, now you can route it via CDNs, or you can just download it directly through S3. And it's also not built for like high traffic, right? Because with S3 you can create a distribution via CloudFront, create like cache on every step, and you can have like millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people accessing that same object at the same time, and AWS can handle that load. EFS is not built for that, right? EFS has a different use case. What these guys have done now, finally coming to the point, now because you have all the context and information, they have basically combined EFS with S3, right? That is the release. That was the video. I just wanted to say that they have released EFS with S3, and it would have been like a sufficiently simple video, but I just gave you the full context of what's going on. And one of the use cases for using S3 files, for example, is for coding agents, or AI agents which are interacting with these file systems. Now you may or may not need to use that, but platforms which help you wipe code, or just create applications from a prompt, would definitely have a good use case for this. And if you're a wipe coder, or if you are using AI for creating a lot of code, whether that's in your professional work or your personal work, you need to test that code in order to make sure that it works properly and does not break on production. And that is where today's sponsor, TestSprite, comes into play. TestSprite is an AI testing agent that can help you ship much higher quality code when you're using it compared to when you're not. This is basically an end-to-end testing solution for you, from generating tests to running them in the cloud and then also using their autonomous agent for fixing whatever your buggy code is doing. It works beautifully with your existing systems like Claude, Cursor, Windsurf, any sort of IDE or terminal agent that you're using. TestSprite can just work directly inside it. They have their MCP server and they have their whole backend system and CI systems to run the test and let your AI agent know what's going wrong. You can use TestSprite for backend, frontend, full stack, data testing, AI testing, anything that you can possibly imagine for testing, you can do it with TestSprite. If you watch my content, you would have seen me mentioning TestSprite a lot of times before. And the last time I talked about this, there was a hackathon going on in TestSprite, which has now come for season 2. So if you use my link in description for joining TestSprite's Hackathon Season 2, you're going to land on this page where you will see all the details for joining, prize that you can win, and all the rules that you have to follow. You can also join their Discord community, which I recommend if you're planning on joining this hackathon, which by the way is pretty simple. If you are a builder, you have to build your project just like we always do, and you have to use TestSprite for testing your application. It's dead simple. I have a video as well. I will link it somewhere here, which teaches you how to use TestSprite. You push it to GitHub and you let them know on their Discord server. So it's gonna be super fun. If you're a builder, I do recommend checking it out. All the links are in the description. Once again, thanks to TestSprite for sponsoring this part of the video. And now back to the video. Now under the hood, what's going on is that this EFS over here, this is basically a cache layer. Your actual true data always stay on S3. At the end of the day, once all things are done and dust is settled, everything is done, your data actually stays on S3. You put an EFS as a fast caching system in front of your EC2 or any system that is inside your AWS account, and you route all of your writes through EFS or reads depending on some of the conditions, which I'll get to. But finally, at the end of the day, all of this data goes to S3, right? Now let's talk a little bit about this EFS to EC2 setup as well, because I spent some time reading about this. So first of all, see, the way Elastic File System, this EFS works is that it allows you to mount a network storage to your EC2 or Lambda or whatever, right? So this network storage has to be mounted inside your resource, which is available inside AWS, inside that specific region, right? So this EFS would not really work cross cloud. So you can't say me that this could be your Hertzner instance or DigitalOcean instance that you're using EFS. It's just stupid, because again, the benefit is that this is going to be fast, right? And you'll lose out on that benefit. So the core idea is that you will have this EFS over here. This EFS gets mounted inside your EC2. So basically your applications, your AI agents, whatever it is, when they go to, for example, mount and let's say EFS, for example, over here, when they go to this directory and they do like an ls, this EFS is actually connected to an S3 bucket, right? Or a prefix of your choice. So this is like an S3 bucket over here. And when they do this ls, they are basically checking this S3 bucket, right? And the file system hierarchy is built in such a way that the keys over here, which are like slash separated, the delimiter is slash, more or less gets converted into a file system, right? So S3 itself is not a file system. It's using a real file system in front of it to make the operations possible over here. In reality, this ls is always happening on this. The only thing is that this EFS is smart enough to coordinate or hide that in the background that you are doing it over an S3 bucket. And that is also like eventually, right? It's not immediately. For example, let's say you created a file, echo1 to file.txt, right? So the way this would work is that this would write to EFS first, and then periodically EFS would synchronize this to the S3 bucket. So finally, this file.txt actually exists on your S3. Your EFS would also show that, but your source of truth still remains the S3 bucket, right? Now, there are some interesting decisions that AWS has taken over here in terms of like what they want to do or how this should appear to people. First of all, AWS says that anything which is less than 128 KB as a file, right? Let's say you have a bunch of these files over here inside S3, right? If bunch of them are actually less than 128 KB in size, this over here would actually be eagerly loaded into EFS, which is your cache layer, right? So by default, when you do an ls, for example, it will not load the file's actual content. It will just load the file's metadata, the name and everything, but it will not load the contents. It will load the contents for any file which is less than 128 KB. And this is something that you can configure. If you want this to be 1 MB, you can do that. If you want this to be, for example, 50 KB, you can do that. But the core idea is that for smaller files, it will try to load it into cache because S3 is actually much worse with smaller files, right, than larger files in terms of read performance and write performance. Second decision is let's say you do a cat of, whatever, big file.txt. And if this big file is actually more than 1 megabyte, then what this S3 file system is going to do is that it's going to bypass EFS completely. It will not route your request through EFS. It will route it directly to S3, right? And it will use the internal HTTP API for doing that. Now, the reason for this is because getting this data out of EFS is expensive, first of all. And because this is like a big chunk of data, like let's imagine like you're reading or, feeding a 1 gigabyte of file. Somehow you can achieve good amount of speeds with S3 directly as well for bigger files. Like I mentioned, the performance angle mostly comes into smaller files, which can be avoided with these size constraints. Now, this might create a question in your mind that what if I create a race condition, right? What if you write a fresh file, let's say this file.txt, but this is getting written as let's say a 50 megabyte file, right? And then you immediately read it. Now, lucky for you, the way these things work is all of these common edge cases at least are considered, right? So S3 files internally has a marking the file as a dirty mechanism, right? So if you are creating a file and it creates it on EFS, which has not been synchronized with S3 yet, this EFS layer inside your EC2 mount that you are doing, it's aware about that this file is dirty. So if a file is dirty, that read would go via EFS to your machine instead of, just bypassing and going through S3, right? So these edge cases are actually considered. And that is also one of the advantages of this system, right? Because it's not like this is the first time somebody is attempting to do something like this. It's just that the previous implementations that we had were somewhat buggy and, somewhat incomplete in a way. Some of the implementations, for example, would use S3's metadata itself for storing attributes like, permissions, or the ownership of the file itself and the folder structure and all of that. So yeah, a lot of things to rather discuss on this, but I think this should give you a good enough idea. I will leave all the links in the description for you to check out. I'm not getting into the syntax of, mounting this file systems and all, because that should be relatively simpler for you to understand. But I hope that I was able to give you a concrete, good enough idea on how these things work, because this is pretty interesting, pretty exciting stuff, something that you should be aware about if you're using S3. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm gonna see you in the next video very soon. If you're still watching, make sure you leave a comment, "I watched till the end" below to tell me that you were still here, and let me know what do you think about the video.